Hey, 8th graders. Can you believe all the work that you've done on your personal narrative? You remember way back before Thanksgiving when you did people, places, and emotions that matter? That was your pre-writing. Then you went on and you did that flash write where you actually wrote out your story. Then you did so much revising. You added new openings, you added a new closing, you added dialogue, you zoomed into a moment, you added emotions, like showing us emotions. You did a ton of revising, so your paper's really, the content is really very good. So now we're moving on to the next step, which is editing. And you might wonder, what's the difference between revising and editing? Well, it's kind of like this. Let's say you're going to an event it's an important event, and so you want to look just right. And so you spend all kinds of time picking out the perfect outfit. You consider what shirt goes with what pants, and maybe which socks, and even which shoes. You get dressed, you have everything, you think you're ready to go. Well, that's the revising part. The editing is when you take that last look in the mirror and you make sure that your hair is perfect and that your buttons are buttoned correctly and that your zipper's up and that your socks match. It's kind of this double checking to make sure everything is just how you want it. That's what you're going to do with today's paper. So to help you do that, we've created an editing checklist. And that editing checklist is breaking the parts of the editing process into 5 different areas. So the video today is going to walk you through each area separately. So for example, the first segment will talk about what your title should be and what it should look like. Then you're going to stop the video and you're going to go to your personal narrative, the document that's in Schoology, and you are going to make any changes that need to be made to your title. Then when you have it just how you think it should be, you're going to go and watch the next segment of the video, and then you'll go and make those changes to your document. You'll have 5 different segments, so 5 different video segments, and 5 times you'll go into your personal narrative looking for different things, trying to make changes to different things. Now, this checklist can be found in Schoology, so it might be helpful for you to pull this up so you can refer to it when you're back in your personal narrative to make sure you've met all the things on each segment of the checklist. So you're going to be going between Edpuzzle, your personal narrative, and if it's helpful for you, this editing checklist. Okay, here we go. The first thing you're going to be checking as you move into the editing is your title, okay? A good title should fit the story without giving it completely away. It should be clever, it should be thoughtful, and when you've thought of what you want it to say, how do you format it? Well, the first letter of each important word should be capitalized. The rest of the letters are in lowercase. The title should not be in quotation marks, nor should it be underlined, and it should be centered at the top of your document. So if you look at this example on the left, you'll see that not only is this not an interesting or clever title, it just tells the name of the assignment. That's not meeting really this first requirement on the checklist. Secondly, it's underlined. You do not want to underline your title, nor do you want to put it in quotation marks. And finally, this title is left justified, meaning it's along the left margin. You don't want that. You want it centered. So if you look at the example on the right, you'll see that this is exactly how you want your title. So if you don't have a title, now is the time you're going to stop the video and you're going to add that, making sure you're formatting it correctly. If you already have a title, you're going to make sure that it meets all these criteria on the checklist, okay? So before moving on to the next segment of the video, go to your personal narrative and make sure your title is just how you want it to be. Okay, welcome back. The next thing you're going to look through as you move on in this editing process is your paragraphing, okay? Now remember, we talked about when new paragraphs should begin. Like, for example, when a new character comes along, when the setting changes, like you move from, your house to the garage in your story, something like that. When a new person speaks, remember our dialogue, that was one of the big rules, that every time a new person speaks, a new paragraph begins. And finally, every time a new event or segment of the story begins. I noticed when I was looking at some of my students' paragraphs in their essays, some of them are really long, which makes it a little bit tricky for the reader to digest that much information at once. So if you have a paragraph that is a third of your page or a half of your page, go into that paragraph and look kind of critically, where could I start a new paragraph? Where could I break up this information to make it a little bit easier for my reader to read, okay? Then when you decide, yep, these are where my paragraphs should be, I've put the proper paragraph, I've started where I want a new paragraph to begin, you want to make sure that each paragraph is indented, either using your tab key, or if you're on an iPad and you can't figure out how to tab, then you're going to space in 10 spaces. And also you want to make sure there are no extra lines of space between your paragraphs. So again, if you look at the example, you're going to see, first of all, this paragraph is not tabbed in at all. It's along the left-hand margin, which is incorrect. This one is actually tabbed in twice. So that's way too far. You want to make sure you only have one tab of space at the beginning of each paragraph. The third mistake on this one is you see this giant gap of space between the two paragraphs. You don't want all that extra space. Instead, it should look like this one. You should have equal amount of space between each line of text. Okay, so now you're going to go back, stop the video, go back to your personal narrative, and you are going to make any paragraphing changes that you need to make. Okay, so go ahead and do that before moving on to the next segment of the video. The next thing you want to look for in your editing process is your capitalization. Now, some just reminders about capitalization rules. The first word in every sentence should be capitalized. The first word of every line of dialogue should be capitalized. The word I is always capitalized, including if you use a contraction like I'll or I'm, the I should be capitalized. And finally, all proper nouns are capitalized. If you think back to your IXL from last week, that included people's names, products like maybe Kleenex, or maybe Apple, like an Apple product. You definitely would want to capitalize product names. Also places, cities, states, countries, street addresses. So if you look at this example, you're going to see there's lots of mistakes, okay? So like for example, this is a lowercase h starting the sentence. You can't do that. In the first line, you see a lowercase I. Nope, that one has to be capitalized. Now in the last kind of paragraph here, you're going to see a question that's kind of comes up with kids. When you use dad or mom, do you capitalize it? Or grandma or grandpa, do you capitalize it or not? Well, here's how that works. If you could replace the dad or the mom, whichever word you're looking at, with your dad or mom's name and the sentence would still make sense, then you capitalize it. So for example, dad said to my mom, my dad's name is Daryl, so if I put the word Daryl in place of dad, does the sentence still make sense? Daryl said to my mom, yep, it makes sense. So I know that because I can replace it with a name, this should be capitalized. Now what about mom? Would I capitalize mom? Well, let's use the same rule. If I replace the word mom with my mom's name, which is Lois, would the sentence still make sense? Let's read. Dad said to my Lois. Nope, it wouldn't make sense. So that then you would not capitalize the word mom. Okay, so again, it's kind of tricky capitalization. So if you want to do a little comparison, look at the changes that I've made to this right-hand one. Then you're going to go back and make sure you have capitalized every first word, every first word in every line of dialogue, every I, and every proper noun. So go ahead and do that before moving on to the next segment of the video. Okay, verb tense. Now, verb tense is kind of a tricky one. Okay, some of you wrote your stories in past tense, meaning it sounds like it happened in the past. Some of you wrote your story, even though it happened in the past, in present tense to kind of add more excitement to your story. Either one is fine, but whichever verb tense you wrote your story in, the whole thing has to be written in that verb tense. So if you chose present tense, all your verbs have to be present tense. If you told your story in past tense, you would want to use all past tense verbs. So if you look at the example, the first sentence has some problems right away. The first time I see the kitten that was to be mine, I fell in love. Well, right away. See is present tense, was is past tense. So you have to go through every sentence and make sure that either it's all past or it's all present tense. Now you can make a comparison between the one on the left and the one on the right to see how I changed it to make the verb tense consistent. Now you guys, a little bit of advice. If this one's really tricky for you, have someone else read it over looking for specifically verb tense. Have a parent, a sibling, ask one of your teachers if they can look at it to make sure that your verb tense is consistent. Inconsistent verb tenses in a story make the story really confusing. So you want to make sure that you put in just that little extra effort to make sure your verb tense is correct throughout your story. So go ahead, stop the video, go to your personal narrative, looking at verb tense before moving on to the next segment of the video. Okay, guys, home stretch. The last thing you're going to be looking for in the editing process is your end punctuation. Of course, you know that every sentence needs to end with a period or question mark or exclamation point, but sometimes when we're typing, we just forget to put them in. So you're going to want to look at your document and make sure every sentence actually has an end mark, signaling the end of the sentence, okay? Now, the second thing on the checklist doesn't really fit under end punctuation, but I wasn't quite sure where else to put it. You might have noticed that when you're typing in Google Docs, sometimes things will be underlined and you're like, wait a minute, I didn't underline them, what the heck? Anytime you see something underlined, it's the computer telling you that something doesn't quite seem right. Now, the computer doesn't always know, but what you're going to want to do is when you see something underlined, like for example, this word is misspelled, you can see that, that's why it's underlining it. You're going to click on the word that's underlined and you're going to get a little pop-up that tells you what the computer thinks the correct way to say that would be. Sometimes you're going to want to accept that correction. Like for example, it'll tell me how to spell the word squeezed correctly. And sometimes you're going to be like, nope, it says it how I want to say it. I'm not going to make the change. Either way, you want to make sure you go and look at everything that's underlined, each place, to see what you need to do and that it says it exactly how you want it to say it. So for the next segment of your editing process, you're going to check for end punctuation and you're going to pay attention to anything that is underlined. Go to your personal narrative, look for those two things, and then you'll come back to this video for one final segment. Okay, guys, final word. We know that some of you probably just watched this video just so you could make it appear that you had done the work, right? And you get the points for the ed puzzle, and we can't stop you from doing that. But I would challenge you to this. If you spend a ton of time getting ready to go to a special event, does it make sense to walk out the door without your hair combed? No, that would be silly. And likewise, you've put so much time and energy and effort into these papers. Don't cheapen it by rushing through or skipping the editing process. Don't dishonor your work like that. So if you have rushed through any parts, go back, rewatch the video if necessary, make the changes, look in your paper, make those editing changes that are really going to make your paper something that you can be proud of. You might think that after you finish this video that you should click submit. You should not click submit because there's one more step that we're going to have you do. So thanks for your hard work today. Have a great rest of your day and we will see you next time.